I'm the Executive Director here at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Herkimer County. Welcome to the first of our Rooted and Resilient series for spring 2005. This is a program that is designed for beginners who want to learn homesteading skills. And Cornell Cooperative Extension has been the center for learning about homesteading skills for well over 100 years. We teach gardening, we work with farms, we work with landowners, and what we're hoping to do tonight is begin a series that introduces the basics of gardening. Also in the series, I'm going to jump ahead. We're going to talk about beekeeping next week, gardening for self-sufficiency. So we're going to start on looking at specific vegetables to plant that are able to feed your family with the least input and the most return. We'll go into backyard poultry, chickens, ducks, and geese. Then some more in-depth garden look, soil health and regenerative gardening, how to feed your soil as it feeds you, pollinators and resilient gardening, how to make sure that your garden is prepared for any of the weather eventualities that we've been facing. And finally, maintaining a thriving garden on April 30th. This session is the nuts and bolts of how to well manage a garden so it doesn't get ahead of you and so that you get the best return for your labor and time. I want to start with this quote. I'm a historian by training, and one thing that strikes me continually in the field of agriculture and food is that this quote is very accurate. This is Joel Salatin, by the way, if you haven't known Joel. He's a writer on food and homesteading. He has a YouTube channel, but mostly he's known for his books. This is a book entitled This Ain't Normal, Folks, A Farmer's Advice for Happier Hens, Healthier People, and a Better World. He notes that the first supermarket supposedly appeared on the American landscape in 1946. That's not very long ago. Until then, where was all the food? Dear folks, the food was in homes, gardens, local fields, and forests. It was near kitchens, near tables, near bedsides. It was in the pantry, the cellar, the backyard. And this was true going back not just in 1946, but really through time. I ran a place called the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York for many years. And there I stressed that 100 years ago, 95% of all Americans either lived on a farm, grew up on a farm, or had a close relationship with a farmer in one way or another. And everyone was very familiar with the rhythms of agriculture and of the seasons and where food came from. Today, farming has declined to such an extent, or you can say it's been successful to such an extent, depending on how you look at it, that where almost 100% of folks were farmers in the 19th century and early 20th century. Today, less than 2% of all Americans produce all of our food, all of our domestic food. Farmers have, as a number, have declined to such an extent that they're no longer a separate occupational category on the US Census. But they've been so successful that they've been able to feed us. So we're going to, hold on, first I'm going to change the lighting level. Balance things out a bit. So we're drawing on the resources of Cornell University at Extension here. And there's some websites cited up there that you might want to look at, as well as the resources here at our local office. One thing you should know is that we're going to send a follow-up email to this session on tomorrow or Friday, and it will have these websites, so you don't really need to copy them down right now. But Cornell is a great resource for learning how to garden, problem solving, and it can either be by looking up the website or publications like the Vegetable Varieties for New York Gardeners, which is a publication that has field-tested varieties that work well in our climate. And then also our local offices. Here in Herkimer County, we're on Route 5, just east of Lowe's, if you know where that is, in East Herkimer, outside the village of Herkimer. You get soil testing done there. We can provide you with garden and integrated pest management. We can provide help on diagnosing problems. And we've also started a website called cultivateherkimer.org, which is a celebration of local agriculture to Herkimer County. So before I begin, I just want to give some tips because this is geared towards beginners. And this is the time of year when the snow is melting. A lot of it melted today. There's very little left on my property, just some in the corners. Um, so we start thinking about putting shovels to earth and getting some gardens put in. That's great, and that enthusiasm is wonderful, and you want to harness it. But we really suggest you start small, start easy. That way you have success because it's easy to overplant, and then you can turn your back, and a week later your garden's infested with weeds. You get discouraged and you give up on it. And we don't want you to do that. We want you to plan your garden, build it to the right size. Even if you only plant a few tomato plants or potatoes or in the basics, start where you can manage it so that you can have a good, successful experience and know what it's like to grow a plant through the course of a season. Um, the next step is to be patient, observe, and record. Because you'll be surprised. You buy plants or you buy seeds and you plant them, and then you forget what kind they were and you really like them, but you can't find the seed packet. So you don't know what you get for next year. But it's really important to kind of jot that down, keep a little notebook, or use an app on your phone, whatever works for you, so that you can go back and say, this is what it is, this is what I want, or it didn't work, so I don't want to do that plant. Um, and the other thing is, if you're starting out, ask questions, not just from CCE, but from your neighbors, from gardeners, because people have the local knowledge, and gardening is by nature very local. So look for support from friends and others. There's always someone in the neighborhood who has a good garden. See what they're doing, see what they plant, see what their ideas are. And finally, enjoy your time in the garden and you will enjoy the work. If you look at it as work, it's going to become onerous and tedious. But if you enjoy your time in nature and watching the plants grow and sharing that with your family and friends and neighbors, you'll have a good time and it'll be a great experience. So we're going to start with the fundamentals. And I'm starting with also the quote from Wendell Berry, the great poet and essayist about rural life. The soil is the great connector of lives, the source and destination of all. It is the healer, restorer, and resurrector, by which diseases pass into health, age into youth, death into life. Without proper care for it, we can have no community, because without proper care, we can have no life. So the first thing to realize is, where you are. And right now, I'm actually not in Herkimer County, I'm in Otsego County, but you can see on this map, this is the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone map for New York. You can zoom in. There are apps or websites which will go by zip code. These are the temperatures of the coldest extremes, and also correlates last frost dates and first frost dates in the fall. One thing you should know is this chat map has been changing, that we've gotten a whole zone warmer in the last 20 years. It's updated every year. And so you should keep aware of where we are. We're now in zone 5A in most of Herkimer County, and up in Old Forge, which had been zone 3, is now zone 4A. So, there are changes. We can see that in the landscape. We can see that in the type of trees and plants that grow. It gives us a little bit longer growing season. Luckily, we're well sheltered from the worst of it, but also it has invited in new creatures, some of which are good and some of which are not good, which we're trying to manage. The other thing about gardening in your neighborhood or your environment is, because we have a hilly topography, we have microclimates. And those microclimates can change within just a few hundred yards of one another. If you ever drive from Richfield Springs down into the village of Mohawk, you go down Vickerman Hill and you're going through several different microclimates. And if you were going up there last week in the snowstorms, you would have thought you were in Siberia. But each one of those places is different. The way the sun falls, where the wind goes, with the Mohawk Valley, with the peaks, the steep fall offs on the southern end, that changes very rapidly. It also changes to the north, where it goes up into the hills. So again, talk to friends and neighbors, see what works in your backyard. So we're going to talk about some basics to start with. Light, soil, water, physical access. How do you get to the garden? How do you get things planted? Exposure to deer and people. You want to be, we live in a very deer heavy zone. And finally, you want to think about also how you're integrating that with your home and landscape. Is it going to be a separate standalone, or are you going to build it in and build a food-based landscape? By the way, so if you have questions as I go along, please leave them in the chat. And there are a couple of folks, staff members, who are standing by who will help answer questions. And we will have time at the end where I can go and kind of go through, and if anything didn't get answered, we will address that then. So light is probably the most important thing. And you want to make sure that your site gets about 6 hours a day. And you want to make sure that the shade pattern, if you have trees around you, it will be the same through the course of the season. I made the mistake of putting in a garden where I had some trees that kind of overstoried a part of it. And I didn't account for that. And I would put in the garden before the trees leafed out. When they leafed out, I have a whole corner of my garden that's kind of shady. So one way of managing a situation like that, we have a part of your garden that's shady and part of it's sun, is leafy greens like lettuce, spinach, and other greens actually like a little less light. They prefer 4 to 6 hours of light rather than a full 6 hours of light. Whereas others, like the root and fruiting vegetables, carrots, tomatoes, peppers, and other warm weather crops, they get lots of light and heat, 6 to 8 hours. So you can look at your site, lay it out, look at it through the course of the day, see if there's any shade that comes across at any particular time, anticipate tree leaves leafing out at some point so that you can kind of anticipate, figure out what's going to go where, and plan your garden accordingly. Soil. Soil is the next most important thing. And soil is kind of like a long-term investment. The soil you have is not the soil you want to have at the end of the first garden season or at the end of 5 gardening seasons. You want to focus on building up your soil. Even if you have good soil, relatively good soil to start, you can always improve it. And there are essentially 4 types of soil: sandy, loamy, silty, and clayey. One of the resources you'll get is a handout on how to evaluate your soil. In the Mohawk Valley, the one we run into the most often is clay soil, clayey soil, heavy soil. And it can be challenging for folks to grow in, but there are ways of amending it, of tilling it, of managing and working through the soil to lighten it and loosen it up. And we're going to talk about that particularly in the session on soils and gardening. You also want to know what your nutrients are. And your nutrients are going to be the key towards what your plants will thrive under. You can get a soil test done at Cornell Cooperative Extension, and that will give you the basics of soil analysis, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Actually, it won't give you nitrogen, and nitrogen is a very important part of the nutrient cycle. Nitrogen is important because it is the prime stimulator of green growth, but it is also in constant flux. There's a nitrogen cycle. And one of the handouts will get more into that, but nitrogen's a prime thing that you want to consider adding, but you don't want to add too much because it will overstimulate your plants. Finally, because we live in the Mohawk Valley, many of the communities are former industrial communities, and you may be concerned about possible toxicity in your soil. If you live in a village and there was a factory there, you want to have your soil tested, or you can build a raised bed and bring in fresh soil, so you don't have to worry about that. But you should think about that. Anybody who lives in a built environment that is dates back before, say, 1950 or so, you want to consider what toxins might be in your soil because you don't want to bring that into your food. Um, and you can manage it, and there's different ways of managing it. There are tests for that. They need to be done off-site. So if you have a concern with that, you can contact us at Cooperative Extension, and we can tell you where you can get those tests done and how to interpret the results. So you can be assured that you have a safe growing environment. At some point, you're going to want to amend your soil fertilizers. If you're growing for food, you're going to need to think about adding fertilizers, adding nutrition to your plants. You can grow a perfectly sufficient garden without adding fertilizer, but you're not going to get the kind of food production that you might want if you're growing this as a primarily or as an important interest as in providing food for you. And this is one of the first stops where we need to think about your personal philosophy about what you want to use and what you want to how you want to garden. And the philosophy here is conventional or organic. Conventional soils, conventional fertilizers are made with synthetic chemicals. They come from a factory. They're cheap. Relatively speaking. You can get them in the big box stores in various forms, from pellets to soil amendments to the blue water that you water your plants with that have all kinds of brand names that I'm not allowed to say. Um, they have some good points and they have some problematic points. One of the good points is they have very precise ratios of nutrients. So you can buy the numbers, the three numbers on a package of fertilizer are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Sometimes you just want all nitrogen all the time if you want to stimulate green growth. Other times, like if you're planting seedlings, if you're transplanting seedlings into your garden, you'll want a fertilizer that's stronger in phosphorus. And those in the balance, so the three numbers, the middle number would be higher. And those products are very precise, so they're easy to meter out and get what your result. So another good thing about synthetic or conventional fertilizers is the release is instant and you get very quick satisfaction because you can almost see it green up when you put fertilizer, conventional fertilizer on it. So it's a quick result. The downsides are soil health. If you overuse fertilizer, it can damage the soil. It can damage the soil structure. It can create salts, which will be toxic to plants moving over time, and it can reduce microbial life. It's unlikely to do this to a great extent in the amount that home gardeners use, but it's something to keep in mind. Environmental impact can contribute to water pollution through overuse. If you put too much fertilizer on, that's going to get into the water supply. If you're on a well, it might get into your well water. It's something you need to do precisely, and that's true of all farming and garden chemicals. The good news is conventional fertilizers are cheaper. They are subject to the cost of raw materials, and the raw materials are often made from natural gas or petroleum byproducts. So as the price of gas goes up, the price of fertilizer will go up. But they are generally much cheaper than packaged organics. And they do promote rapid growth, but also can be an out of balance growth because if you stimulate too much green growth with nitrogen, the plant is just going to produce green growth, leaves. And if it's a plant like a pea or a pepper, it may not fruit, and then you may not fruit as much. So you'll actually diminish the return of food over time. So you have to be very careful with all these things. Follow the instructions to a T, and that's the best way moving forward. So organic fertilizers are made from natural sources: bone meal, blood meal, compost, fish emulsion. Cover crops can be a fertilizer. They release the nutrients very slowly because they degrade into the into the soil and release their nutrients over time. So it's more of a constant feeding rather than a burst feeding. Uh, organic soils are also, organic fertilizers are also very good for soil health because they build the soil over time and they encourage the growth of microbial creatures, which are generally good for plant fertility. And they're generally pretty benign in the environment. Again, overuse, particularly of animal manures, can cause nutrient runoff. Um, One thing about animal manures is you have to be careful that they're well rotted, meaning they've been out and composted for a period of time. Many people will be talking about backyard poultry. Chicken manure is an excellent fertilizer, but it's very hot. It will overstimulate the plants and burn the roots if it's put on fresh. So you need to rot it. Mix it in with your compost pile and let it sit for a month or two to break down, and then it will be a good source for you.
Garrett?
Cost. Cost is, packaged organic fertilizer can be very expensive. Um, but the opposite extreme is you can make your own homemade organic fertilizer, and it's very cheap. I'll be going more into this in the session on regenerative gardening, how you can make your own fertilizer at home, which are very low cost. Um, but they're can be cost free almost in some cases. But again, the packaged stuff is better balanced, has micronutrients, and it's well worth considering. And finally, the plant growth, it can be very slow, but generally good over the course of the season. Talk a little
Garrett,
bit about,
Allie has a question for you.
oh, yes,
Hey, Garrett, there's just one part in the chat. Someone is asking if you could repeat the last part about yield and how too much can make green growth only.
sure.
That's the question.
So, particularly with conventional fertilizers, but it can also happen with too hot manures. It stimulates leaf growth of the plant rather than fruit growth. So fruit or the vegetable growth. So if you put too much on, particularly early in the season, the plant will look great. It'll zoom up, but it won't yield as much vegetables as you would like. So just again, follow instructions, be careful not to overutilize. I actually I mix conventional and organic just because I have it's convenient. I don't mix them together, but I do different things at different times. So early in the season, when I get the garden ready, I I have a big compost pile. I have chickens, so I mix the chicken manure in with the compost, make sure it's well rotted, then I mix it into the soil in the planting bed. Then if I have a specific nutrient deficiency or when I'm putting transplants in particularly, I have some transplant conventional fertilizer, which is it's a blue water product. And I'll water with that just to get the roots because that's very good at stimulating root growth. So I hope that answers the question. So compost. Compost is very important. It's a great way of, it's kind of a fertilizer you'll build yourself, but compost does not equal fertilizer. Compost should be thought of as an important component for building your soil. It has fertility and nutrition in it, but that's not its primary benefit. Its primary benefit is building the soil so that the plant thrives in it and gets better access to water and nutrition. So if we have a heavy clayey soil, compost is a great thing to mix into your soil to lighten it up. And by lightening it up, the roots can penetrate deeper, and also they can get into and access the nutrition of not just the compost, but whatever fertilizer you put into it or nutrition product. So that's, primary. It also adds micronutrients. And those micronutrients depend upon the source of the compost. Here in Herkimer County, a lot of farms So you can get well-rotted cow manure or sometimes horse manure. You have to make sure that it's been sitting for quite a while. Horse manure in particular carries weed seeds. So you want that well broken down so you're not bringing more weeds into your garden. And we'll be talking about weeds and weed management in a subsequent session. But you want to see what the source is. Another source of compost of a different nature is the Herkimer Oneida Solid Waste Authority composts yard waste, leaves, grass clippings, and the like. And that's a very low cost way of building your soil. Um, I know some people are wary because they don't know where it's coming from and are a little bit concerned about, again, some sort of chemical influence. But the good thing about that particular source is they test it every month and they post the tests on their website. So you can see it right there. And I've been monitoring it for a few years now, and I've never seen a problem in their tests. The quality of it is good. It changes a little bit from season to season, but the price of it is extremely reasonable. So, for example, if you have a full-size pickup truck, a load of compost is $15. So you can do a lot with a pickup load of compost from them. And if you compare that to buying compost at a big box store, it's going to be many times less than that. And you buying it from a store doesn't mean it's actually any better quality, because if you buy it from a store, you rarely can find a test result that's going to tell you what's in that. You can see what's in it, but it's not, you don't know. And at least with the composted yard waste, you can see what's in it, and you can see that it's pretty good quality. So the other critical thing is watering. And we see a lot of problems people have with watering. And, as we know, here in upstate New York, the seasons are highly variable. The summer season, we can have a wet summer, a dry summer, and both are issues for gardening. You want to make sure you have the right amount at the right place. Um, Sprinklers and things like that really don't work very well in a garden environment. You want to go and either have a hose. The child with that watering can, that's a very nice thing. But you got to move that watering can back to the tap many, many times to water the garden. So when you plan your garden, you want to think about where it is in relation to your water source. There's some community gardeners on the call tonight who've been hauling water distances or having water brought in by the town. And it becomes kind of a burden. So if it's in your backyard, you can control that and you can kind of figure out where the best place is. Mulch, we're going to talk a little bit more about mulch in a minute, but mulch will help you moderate the amount of water you're using. Putting down a good bed of mulch will keep the water in the garden, in the soil, and it'll also suppress weeds. And finally, don't overwater. I'm going to talk a little about garden design so you can kind of manage your water a little bit in a minute. If you have a very rainy summer and you have a clay soil, you can have problems with standing water, or even in my yard, I have a stream that sometimes flows through my backyard. So I till my soil with a specific path for the water to go through the middle so I can direct it so it doesn't spread through the whole garden. And finally, this isn't really a water issue, but I don't know where else to put this. You should be aware that we have a very humid climate. And it's been very hot and humid the last few summers. And we've been seeing a lot of plant issues with fungal diseases. The blights on tomatoes and some on potatoes, fungal diseases of all sorts on landscape. If you see spots on your leaves of your plants, take a look at them, investigate them. If you can't figure out what they are, either by yourself or looking them up online, shoot us an email and we'll help you with that. and you can take action. You want to take action quickly so that you don't lose the plant. And that could be just trimming the leaves off the bottom or rearranging your mulch so it shields it from water, from splashback, or etc. So plants, we want to get everything in the ground at once, and the season is about to start, hasn't quite started yet. Um, there are things that we can get in very early, and these are the cool season crops. Peas can go in as soon as you can work the soil. They will start to sprout when it's as warm as the soil is as warm as 45 degrees. So you can get a jump start in your garden by getting these crops in early. So spinach, cole crops, Swiss chard, cabbage, onions. Usually you start with, if you haven't started your onions inside, you're going to start with sets or onion plants, kale or leeks as well. So these plants will start off in the cool soil, and they'll also tolerate some frost hits. So that's another thing to consider. Then we have the other plants, which are our warm season plants. These tend to be the garden favorites, our tomatoes, peppers, corn, eggplant, and cucumbers. These don't do well and won't grow until the soil temperature is over 60 degrees and after the danger of frost is passed. So I recommend you can buy a cheap kitchen digital thermometer with a probe, and that works fine for testing the soil temperature. That's a good accessory to have because as it gets warm and you want to get things out, you want to make sure that you're consistently over 60 degrees before you plant them in, because the danger is that if it's just at that liminal area and it's 60 degrees one day and it goes down to 40 the next, as can happen here, your seeds might rot in the ground. And you don't know that until weeks have gone by and nothing's come up, or it's come up poorly, and then you have to start all over again. And you thought you were jumping the season and you'll end up behind the 8 ball. So test the temperature, and what's nice and warm. Generally, sometime in that magic moment between mid-May and Memorial Day, it will be the right temperature. So know when that is, and then you can get your plants in the ground. So building your soil, building your garden, you can do several different types. You have a conventional garden in your ground. That's going to give you the best volume. You'll be able to build it bigger because it's cheaper to do that if you have the right soil. Raised beds, such as you can see here, this is the Frankfurt Community Garden, and they look like they're filling up the raised beds. The good thing about raised beds is that you can fill it with soil that you want. So you don't, if you have a clay soil or sandy soil, you can control for that with a raised bed. It limits your growing space, but it's going to be a higher quality growing experience for the plants. It's a little bit easier to manage. It's a little bit more expensive because you have to buy the wood or other materials to build your raised beds. But a well-built raised bed can last 8 to 10 years easily. And container gardens, if you live in an apartment or just have a small place, you can grow in containers. We're going to have some information on that. Even grow bags. Grow bags are available at box stores or online, like Amazon or someplace like that. And it's just a woven fabric, plastic fabric bag. You can fill it with soil. Great way to grow potatoes. Very easy. Or growing a tomato plant or two, so you can get some of that going. So the physical needs of a garden, very simple, what we talked about. Quality soil, you want to work it open up down to 6 to 7 inches. So the plants have roots have plenty of places to grow. Remove any stones, roots, or other things that you find there in the garden. You can find all kinds of things. I found with the remainder of the kids' sandbox one time when I was building a garden with all kinds of toys from the 1950s that were well rusted. And then think again about your water drainage if you have particularly if you're an in-ground, so that the water has someplace to flow where it's not going to damage your plants. So Gandhi said this, and I think it's very true for all of us: to forget how to dig the earth and to tend the soil is to forget ourselves, because human nature. If we think about all the people of the world, we were all farmers at one point because we all needed to provide food for our families. And it's something that we have largely forgotten as a society, which is, the mission of cooperative extension is to reintroduce those basic human skills to folks. So thinking about what you want to grow, one of the first things to think about is, what do you like to eat? What does your family like to eat? Um, you don't want to grow anything, particularly if you have kids, it's too exotic that they're not going to know what it is when they look at it. So start with things that will be popular, and then introduce stuff either on later on. So some of the things you want to think about starting seeds. What's the source? Um, there's a million places to buy seeds. You can buy seeds at the dollar store. You can buy at big box stores. You can buy high-end seeds from artisanal growers that are organic and are curated. The costs are from 50 cents a pack to, $10 for, 5 seeds. I prefer to buy my seeds when I'm buying seeds from growers that know the local uh, the region. Doesn't have to be from the Mohawk Valley, but it should be from the Northeast. And there will be a list of seed sellers on our resource page, which will come up. But the reason to buy from them, if you can, is that first of all, they know what grows. They're in the business of producing seed. So they know how to package it. They know what varieties to use. They're buying quality seed. And their reputation is on the line. But in a pinch, the dollar store seeds will produce something. The big box stores will produce something. I've gotten something from all those different things at one point or another. We're going to talk about saving seed in one of the later sessions of this series. So you can, trade seed with friends and neighbors. And here in the Mohawk Valley, we have a wonderful tradition of people saving seeds of particular varieties that have grown well in this area. So there's seed swaps and other things to do that. So when you look at a seed catalog, you're going to see a couple of different things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these, but days to harvest and the space needs. You want to choose something that's going to grow in our growing season. So start counting days, and there's a planting calculator. Again, I'll link this on our resource page, but there are a couple of different planting calculators where you can put in your zip code and the crop, and it will tell you when to plant at certain times. Heirlooms versus hybrids. I'll go into this in greater detail in a moment. Disease resistance. We have a lot of plant diseases, particularly, as I said, fungal diseases, and you can choose varieties that are resistant to those problems, and that's going to help you in the long run. Locally appropriate seeds. Again, I talked about some of the resources. The publication that will be available for download is the Cornell New York State Vegetable Varieties publication. And what that is a curated group of vegetable varieties that have been chosen by Cornell horticultural faculty and then tested out in the field by lots of home gardeners, by yourself, who rated it and put in comments on it. So you can see what works in different places. So we talked about this. So I want to talk about, focusing on is something to think about is open pollinator heirloom seeds versus hybrid. This is another important decision to make, is which are you going to use, one or the other or both. Open pollinated plants, which are sometimes called heirloom seeds, are plants that have evolved over time usually in a particular place and have a set quality, color, flavor, growing qualities. Sometimes if they're in one place for long enough, they are known, they get a place name. There's a favorite variety of sweet corn called Seneca Chief, which comes from Western New York. It's an open pollinated sweet corn. My wife's great uncle grew it with great pride for many years. Because it's open pollinated, it's not hybrid, you have to pick it on exactly the right day for it to actually be sweet and edible. If you let it go for 2 or 3 days past that, all the sugars turn to starch, and it was not flavorful at all. But if you got it in just the right day, it was perfect. Production, they're not geared necessarily for production, but some of them are good producers. Some of the possible negative issues are disease resistance, non-uniform appearance, if that matters to you. Storage, they tend to be eaten better fresh. They weren't bred for particular storage qualities. Some folks are very aware of tomatoes that have been bred specifically for commercial growers in California to grow and ship them throughout the US or throughout the world. And they are grown only for storage quality. So they look like a red tomato for weeks. They don't taste like anything. I don't think they have the nutritional quality of a heirloom, but they look perfect and sliced on a hamburger or something for a commercial venue. They work very well. Another important consideration of heirloom or open pollinated seeds is you can save the seeds. So from year to year, you can grow your own plants. You don't need to purchase seeds. Hybrid seeds don't breed true. Excuse me. So you'll need to replace them. You'll need to buy new seeds every year. And we'll talk about seed saving and the process for doing that in a subsequent session. Hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds are kind of a modern miracle. You do need to purchase them every year, but they have great specific qualities. So disease resistant. I grow a tomato called Galahad, which is comes from Harris seeds, and then there's others, which has done very well in my garden where I'm always having problems with blight. And that's a primary quality of it. It's also a good producer and has good flavor. And I didn't really test the storage qualities because we eat them all fresh, but I was really primarily concerned with disease resistance, and that really met the needs. So you need to buy them every year. You actually prohibited from growing some out for seed or producing them because seeds can be patented and copyrighted. I don't think I'll ever go after a home gardener, but if you're going to commercial production and you're copyrighting, you're using someone's copyrighted seeds, that you might hear from a lawyer, as ridiculous as that may sound. Our vegetable garden's coming along well with radishes and beans up, and we're less worried about revolution than we used to be. That may be a good saying for today. That was E.B. White, the great writer for the New Yorker, who summered in Maine and wrote a lot about his garden up there. So once you have your seeds, how do you get them started? What are you going to do with them? We're going to talk about indoor seed starting, direct sowing, and purchasing transplants. So seed starting requires some investment. I just whipped this up just looking at a Lowe's website, but you're looking at a good couple $300. You may have some of this stuff around. You may have shelving units in your basement or garage. You may have lighting. Soil starter soil is very reasonable. The peat pots are very reasonable. Heat mats are a nice thing to have if you're growing warm weather crops like peppers and tomatoes. Lighting is extremely critical, particularly in our area. I know people start seeds in windowsills and they will germinate, but they won't do well. And I'll show some examples of that. And you can buy expensive grow lights at the big box stores or online. You don't really need them. Fluorescent lights, if you have shop lights, old-fashioned fluorescent shop lights with long tubes, those are perfectly sufficient. Tests have shown that grow lights give you a small advantage, but not much to worry about. It's in single digits percentage growth. However, the light needs to be low. It needs to be within 6 inches of the growing plant. So you need to move it as the plants grow and keep it close, and let the plants grow up to it and then move it up. Old-fashioned fluorescents get a bit warm. They could possibly burn the plant a little bit, but not really very much. So you don't need to worry too much about that, but you do need to give them good lighting. So this is a grow light station that is similar to one that we've used at Cooperative Extension. You can see I have quite a few lights, so that's a pretty big consideration for cost. So when you're growing plants indoors, the first thing you want to do is think about the time to planting. So tomatoes are going to be started in the next couple of weeks. So you start them 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost. Um, you want to keep a close eye on the water because you're keeping the light low. It's going to dry out the plant quicker. So you need to water it more frequently, but again, don't overwater. I feel that you got to feel for the soil, and it should feel damp. It shouldn't feel sodden, and it shouldn't feel dry. Damp would be the way you want to go. The soil needs to be at about 70 degrees. So I know some of our houses have a hard time maintaining 70 degrees, especially if you get a cold snap. A good way to get around that is you can buy heat mats pretty cheaply online. They will warm the plant from the bottom up, and they will stimulate germination. So that's a well worth investment if you're going to start your plants indoors. And then you want to choose a planting container that suits your needs. It's not really a very important thing. I find that actually in this slide, you can see a lot of those are planted in those red solo cups. That's actually works out well logistically because that will then go directly into the garden. You can pull out the plant out of that cup and plant it directly into the garden. The little cells, um, I'm always either overgrowing them or not really timing it correctly. You can do soil blocks with a simple maker with soil, it's also something that goes directly in the garden, no plastic waste, and the peat pots that break down. I'm moving more and more towards growing fewer plants because, like this display here, that's a lot of tomatoes. What are you gonna do with all those tomatoes? Grow less, have more success. And I've also come to the realization that sometimes it's better just to buy. That this is one of our local greenhouses. We're actually, in the last few years, we've had a number of greenhouses built up. And you can buy very high quality plants for much less it's going to cost you to buy all that equipment and stuff. And you can see these are very good shape. Those are tomato plants right there. So you're kind of going to get a real head start there. And they're growing varieties that are well suited, and they're in good condition. You can see what you're getting into. And a final thing about started seedlings is they're pushed a lot. I mean, I see them in supermarkets now. But supermarkets, big box stores, tractor stores, and when I look at the plants, first of all, they're coming from the far ends of the US, the deep South, California. They're not adapted to this location. And often they're not particularly well treated by the staff. I mean, the grocery store in Herkimer has a whole selection. And within a couple of weeks, they're looking pretty sad because no one's out there watering them and caring for them. In a greenhouse, they're caring for them every day. They're in good shape. I highly recommend shopping local. And it's cheaper. The big box stores have gotten very expensive with their started plants. So you're doing a benefit for yourself and for the local economy. So just some final things. You want to create a planting schedule. There are online calculators. Look for your resource page when it comes to you, so you can reflect your transplant time into the garden. Once your plants have grown and they've sprouted and they have those two baby leaves, the cotyledons, I'm never pronouncing that correctly, are done, and the adult leaves start coming up. Turn off if you have a heat mat, turn it off. You don't need that anymore. And you thin. This is something that people never do. If you look at these tomato plants, they're far too thick. You want to thin that right down. And I know that people feel like, well, you develop a sentimental attachment to a tomato plant, almost like a pet, dog or cat. You just got to be brutal and get down one to a pot, because these plants are fighting each other. Even though they look healthy now, they're fighting each other for nutrition and for light space, and all they're going to do is be suppressed in their growth. So really be very strict about that. Keep it very, very, very thin. So these are pictures that I have gotten over time of problems people have. And this is the downside of starting your seeds indoors. So if we go from left to right, there are some seeds that are planted in a soil, this peat pots. Um, and what I can tell you right now, just by looking at it, um, the soil's dry. There's not enough soil in there, and also there's not enough light. So those plants are really struggling. Um, the center picture is basil. Basil is another warm weather uh, crop. It likes warmth. This soil is not warm enough, so it's not warm enough to generate. So you can water that for weeks, and until the soil gets up to about 70 degrees, it's not gonna go. And then finally, these tomato plants on the right. This is probably the biggest problem I see with starting seeds indoors, is they get leggy. And again, we get attached, sentimentally attached to plants. So you want to nurse it along. And yes, you can nurse it along. You can take that leggy tomato plant that only has a few leaves at the top, and you can plant it in the garden. You can plant it so it's mostly horizontal with just the top up, and it will kind of sort of recover. But you're always going to be behind. It's always going to be behind in production. You're going to be nursing it along. Um, it's best, in my mind, at this point, to start over. You just have to make that, you just have to get tough about that. Because you're gonna get frustrated and not get the results that you want to have. Oops. Okay, so some plants need to be directly sown in the ground. They don't work well as transplants. So these are beans, peas, beets, radish, sweet corn, carrots, etc. Again, the label is your friend. You want to look at the label and follow it exactly as you can. Seed catalogs. If you don't have a physical seed catalog, send for one. Send for one from Johnny's, from Harris's, wherever. Johnny's is particularly good in terms of instructions and cultivation because they'll have very specific instructions on how to grow these things, when to plant them, where to plant them, spacing, etc. And those are true, for the species, regardless of what variety you're getting from who. So use them as a reference guide. Very handy. Um, you want to think about as you're planting to plan your garden and make accommodations for rows, supports for beans and peas and those things that need to grow up on something. So what I like to do, and I find works very well, is for conventional in-ground gardens, hill your rows so they're up about 8 inches and they're about 30 inches wide. That way you can heavily mulch the walking areas with straw or plain cardboard, even like old Amazon boxes, or if you have a dog, Chewy boxes, which we have a million of in the basement here, if you need any. Or you can use landscape cloth or even paper. I was in Lowe's today, and building paper is very cheap, and it's just plain paper. And lay that out, weigh it down, use landscape staples or something to get it down, and then cut holes. This is going to save you endless time weeding and trying to keep ahead of that. It will also help keep the moisture in. And the paper in particular is biodegradable, so by the end of the season, it will pretty much be gone, and you can just mix it into the soil. So a garden is always a series of losses set against a few triumphs, like life itself. Anybody who's gardened for more than a season knows what this means. Oops. So getting it into the garden, if you're starting your seeds indoors, you want to harden them off, which means taking them outside for little day trips, like you take a child outside. So you want to get them used to the weather. You want to start decreasing the water, the temperature, and the fertilizer, so they're going to start to seek that out, and it's going to stimulate root growth. You want to, if you're planting in flats or pots or whatever, figure out a way to move them in and out so you start for a few hours and eventually for a few days, and then can get them out. And that will help acclimate them to wind, outdoor light, and variable temperatures. When you're transplanting, do it on cloudy days because they'll be sensitive to the sun, particularly the roots and things. Water well after transplanting. use a weak fertilizer. You can get a transplant or seed starting fertilizer, or just use compost tea, but the seedlings like something with a high phosphorus ratio if possible, the middle number, that stimulates root growth. You want to plant at the same depth they're in at the pot. So you want to get them right at about that level, except for tomatoes, because tomatoes have that tend to have a long growing sprout that often has white nodules on it. Those are called root initials. Those are the beginnings of roots. So what you can do is take the tomato out of the pot and lay that part flat in the ground up, so that has that has contact with the soil. That will stimulate root growth on those points and build a firmer structure. Space seeds, dense planting is a problem. Everyone wants to get all the stuff in the garden, and you start to run out of space, so you start putting stuff close together. There are some specific strategies I'll talk about in terms of square foot gardening in a later session. But generally, you want to make sure you have enough space. Small seeded crops, when they have those tiny little seeds, they look like not sesame seeds, but poppy seeds, that size. Carrots, radishes, beets, and lettuce. They will definitely need to be thinned. Carrots come in a pelleted, and I think some of the others come in a pelleted version where they put a seed in a clay pellet, so that you can more accurately space it, so that will need less thinning. But that way you avoid this. This is a problem I've had many times. And others have had, is your carrots are too close together, and they're fighting each other for nutrition and sunlight. And you end up with these small, scrawny carrots when you can have big, beautiful ones, but you need to get them down so that each carrot is, at least 2 or 3 inches apart, so they have that room to grow. So keep that in mind. So summing it all up, know your location, climate, your soil and logistics, choose a site and a method that suits you. We'll be talking more about that in subsequent weeks. Start a paper plan, or start an app, or start a Excel spreadsheet, whatever it is, so that you can go back to it, so that you know what your successes are and your failures are, and you can learn from that. So each year builds upon itself. We're going to talk a lot more in the last session about weeds, pests, and the cycle of the seasons. So how you can extend your growing season, so you can grow more than one crop in the garden through the course of the year, how you can plan for that. But think about that kind of moving forward. And I just want to give again, a plug for the other sessions coming up. Next week, we're going to be talking about beekeeping. I'm a 32-year beekeeper. We're going to do gardening for self-sufficiency, backyard poultry, and on. So I hope to see you. And oops, whoa, I missed that. So any questions that I didn't get to?
Garrett, we have a few questions in the chat. I can
Okay.
go through them for you. We have one from Samantha Francisco saying she just purchased a home in December in Rome. No idea how the soil quality is, but the previous owner has a patch of ground I think was a garden. To start a new garden, how deep should I dig up a new section of the yard? Just topsoil churning. Any suggestions on things to look out for a new garden plot?
So a new garden plot, you want to, yeah, you might want to rent a rototiller. It depends on how much, but you want to go down about 6 or 7 inches. If that had been a garden plot before, it should be the part that was work should be fairly easy to turn over. So I would try to turn that over to see if it was indeed a garden plot, and then expand out from there if that works for you. And while you're turning it over, it's a good time to mix in compost, so that you can lighten the soil up.
Awesome. Okay. Looks like we have another one asking about, is sun good or bad?
Is sun good or bad? Sun's necessary.
Yes, absolutely necessary. And then we have another one for the cold hardy plants like peas and spinach, etc. Are you starting them from seed or seedlings?
The cold hardy plants are almost always direct sown.
Okay.
And I just want to jump back to the light or lack thereof. So if you have a yard that's shaded and you don't have a lot of light, seek to maximize your light. So if you have, if you really want to grow tomatoes, you're going to need light. So you might want to do a container on your porch, or even your patio, or integrate it into your garden somehow. If you'd like to grow more things, you might consider growing something like herbs and greens that will tolerate this shade more.
Okay. And then I kind of answered this one. I don't know if you have anything else to input on here. On the seed packets, what does planting as soon as the ground can be worked mean? Does that mean it can be planted as soon as the ground is thawed, meaning now? I chimed in here and just said it's referring to how wet the soil is and that you'll want it crumbly, not like a mucky mud ball, and that work
Right.
soil will stick together somewhat. But I didn't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, a good way to testing that, because you're exactly right. It's mostly the water. You obviously can't till when it's frozen, but it's mostly when the soil dries out. Um, and a good tilt is when you pick up a handful of soil, get to know soil by the feel in your hands. If you squeeze it and there's no water, it's not like you're squeezing a wet sponge and it's kind of crumbly. That's getting to be the right condition to work.
And then another one, that's my dog, Cedar. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
How do you need to make drain holes in the solo cups, and how do you properly discard of plants?
So yeah, you do need to put some holes with just a drill bit or any kind of sharp awl type thing. 4 or so to a solo cup would do it. And then what was the question about the plants?
How do you properly discard plants?
You mean the plants that didn't work out?
Yeah, that would be my guess. It's from Deanna Christmas.
Compost. We all going to become compost. Let your plants go in there. I've gone to extremes of like having an orphanage of sad plants and trying to nurse them along, and it's always just been sad. So I now just compost. I get there you go.
And then there was one other question just mentioning that they've heard that laying down cardboard can grow mold.
I haven't noticed any particular mold problem doing that. I mean, it tends to get wet and sodden and integrate into the soil more than moldy. Um, yeah. Particularly, you always want to use uncoated cardboard, like again, Amazon boxes or Chewy boxes if you have a dog or cat. Um, but I haven't noticed that if you had a problem with mold, you could just kind of pull it up. But
Yeah,
I, I
haven't
haven't
noticed that either.
I haven't experienced that. Actually, and speaking of mold, since it is the topic of the moment, um, you do see mold in mulch hay. Mulch hay is hay that has kind of gone past due for animal feed, and you can use that for a mulch, but that does get moldy, and it's not particularly dangerous, but it's irritating when you spread it out. It has puffs of mold. So if you have a sensitivity to mold, you want to be careful about using mulch hay. And when you're mulching, um, hay hay is the whole plant. It's a field cut, so it has seeds. So hay brings in weed seeds. You can manage that, but that's an issue. Straw is the shaft of rye or wheat. It's just that it's not, doesn't include the seeds. So it has much less seed that you're carrying. It also tends to be drier. It's more expensive, but it's worth it for the garden. And there are sources. There's a couple of Amish farmers up in Montgomery County that sell it, and it's much cheaper than buying it from a big box store. It's about $4 or $5 a bale for a big bale.
Okay, I think it's just one more question came in here. Would the cardboard method work on a flower farm with corms?
So you're talking about having the corms grow up through the cardboard, I think. right? So you would want to, you have to build a space for it to come out. So and I don't really grow flowers that often, but you would want to build a space and then use the cardboard around the outside. So use it in your row, your walkways and things as a suppressant, but leave plenty of room for the corms to grow out.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. I think we've answered all of them, unless anyone else has any others.
Okay, so thank you for this evening. We'll be back next week with beekeeping. Hope I see you virtually then.
Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you. Bye-bye.